So, yes, my name's David Hogg. I live in Fleet, Zebon Copse, Church Crookham, for those of you that know the area. Suzanne saw one of my posts on one of the Fleet groups where I had pretty much put this kind of image, this slide up, because this has been a kind of pet project of mine over the last 6 years. We moved into this house in 2019, and it was kind of my vision to get it off gas and completely electrified. It's just one of my passions, is to reduce my impact on the environment and just see what technology is available. And sorry, can you see okay?
Yes, I'm fine, yeah.
Just see what's possible, really. So I'm already starting to go through what will be in the talk. So let's make a start. So this is what I'll be shoehorning into the next. Not quite sure how long it'll last. If you want me to stop for a refreshment break, just let me know. So I'll be covering what the house was like when we moved in versus now, the various whats and hows that I've put in place to achieve where I've got to now. And then I really want to share the most practical and easy to implement ideas for you all to take home with you, right from the simplest thing of just measuring what you're using, whether it's buying a thing you can put in a plug socket in the wall to plug your TV into to see how much energy it's using, all the way up to solar panels, heat pump and a battery. I'm going to talk about the grid because the whole concept of zero bills, which basically means you won't, across the year, you won't actually pay any utility bills for heating the house, boils back down to the grid, the national grid, and our relationship with it. And I, for one, find it really fascinating, and I hope that kind of rubs off on you as well this evening. So there are a couple of topics there that I'll be talking about, including load shifting, so moving heavy electricity using devices, shifting them to different times of the day, which is cheaper and also greener. Octopus Energy, who we get our utility, our electricity from. Many of you might know of them. They have saving and free electricity sessions. So saving sessions are for when the grid is under intense use and they're having to fire up gas-fired power stations to meet peak demand. Free sessions is when there's too much renewable energy from solar and wind farms on the grid, and I'm already getting into those slides, so that's something I'll touch on later. I call it the electrification holy grail, the three items that each of themselves are fantastic, but once you have all three, it kind of unlocks this new, I've put it in the slide, it unlocks a new power-up, and it's this idea of zero bills homes, and you kind of need all three to get to that stage. What did it all cost? The most important factor, which it's actually quite, well, that bit was easy to tally up. What does it actually cost to run is a bit more tricky because there's so many variables involved, but I've put as much thought into explaining and showing the running costs into this presentation, so hopefully it'll make sense. Any other bits and bobs that didn't really fit in anywhere else, and also I thought it'd be useful to say as a scale of investment from things that you can do that cost nothing all the way up to things that cost a lot but then will give you a return on investment further down the road. So, a bit daunting, this big table, but basically I wanted to show you what the house was like when we moved in 2019 versus what it's like now. So originally it had the original gas boiler, so the house was built in 1998 or something, so it's still 25 years old. We have now got a 6 kilowatt electric heat pump. The gas boiler originally heated the hot water for the house as well, in a water cylinder upstairs. That's been replaced with a larger water cylinder that's now heated by the heat pump. The cooker is the same, so it's an electric oven and induction hobs, which I think is probably the most efficient way of cooking that you can get, so that's unchanged. There was the standard 10 centimetres of roof loft insulation originally. We've upped that to about 30, so it's quite an improvement. I believe 30 is the recommended level for new builds now. I actually did that myself. It's a horrible job, but it's actually not so expensive. You can buy these big rolls of insulation for £10 or something, and you might need 15 or 20 of them. So it's quite a low investment option. And as I hope I'll convey during the talk, the whole benefit of doing all this starts with reducing how much energy you need to use. So rather than putting loads of heat into a house that's like a colander, start with the fabric of the building and keep as much of the energy in it as possible. Then you don't need to put as much in, and that costs less, it's better for the environment and so on. Obviously there was no solar panels, there was no battery. We now have 2 solar panel arrays, 4 kilowatts. The P, by the way, means peak. So that means when it's completely fully sunny and the sun is at the right angle, it could generate 4 kilowatts of power. So we've got the same size array on both the roof and the wall. The roof one came first because it's where everyone puts their solar panels. And then it took me 4 years of staring at this completely empty red brick south-facing wall on the side of my house to think, that gets really warm every day when the sun is on it. That's untapped potential. And so I had an interesting time getting planning permission for that. Basically they said, no, you won't need planning permission for that, it's considered permitted development. I put it up, and then they said, you'll need planning application for that. And I had to do it retrospectively, but we got there in the end. And then we've got a Tesla Powerwall 2, which is quite a common home energy battery. The average monthly energy bill, I don't actually know what it cost before we did all these modifications, because as soon as we moved in, we put the roof panels and the battery in. So this is actually based on, I just Googled what's the typical average energy bill for a 2 to 3 bed house with 2 to 3 people in it. Ours is a 3-bed semi, and it's just 2 people living there. It's maybe around 143 a month. I haven't had a full 12 months with the heat pump installed, so it was installed in February this year, so in many ways I should have given this talk next February once I've had a whole 12 months of usage. But all the data I've collected shows that on average throughout the whole year, the utility bills for the house will kind of end up being around 0. So we give a lot of energy back to the grid in the summer, which Suzanne was saying about going on an export tariff, which means you get paid for everything you give to the grid. And that's kind of gone into a pot, which we'll draw from during the winter. But on average, I'm hoping will be around 0. And even if it's not exactly 0, the fact that the house will have cost a few tens of pounds maybe to heat and light and power for a whole year, I think is quite special. Calling it 0 bills is a sort of catchphrase term, and I'll talk a bit about that later. In terms of general comfort, previously on gas, because we didn't like gas, we didn't like the idea of burning something, we tried to minimise how much gas we used. So we tended to only heat the house in the morning, just for when we were waking up, having breakfast. We both work, so we're generally out of the house for most of the day and then back home in the evening. So there would be an intense boost of heat in the morning that would temporarily warm the air, and we'd feel comfortable. Then we'd go out for the rest of the day. The house would cool down quite quickly because of the lack of loft insulation, and, sorry, I missed one out there, cavity walls as well. We had that filled. And then in the evening we'd have the heating on again, but we did notice as soon as it went off, it got quite cool quite quickly. And actually we noticed when we had the cavity walls filled, that made one of the biggest differences to the feeling of, before you could tell, oh, has the heating gone off? Oh yeah, it did about 10 minutes ago, but it keeps a lot of that heat in now. So now with a heat pump, for those of you that aren't familiar, the most efficient way to run it is actually low and slow, they call it. So having it on very, very gently the whole time. And one of the reasons for that is that it takes quite a lot of power to get it up and running. So if it's off and then it turns on, that uses a lot of power, and then the power then trickles off, and then it just sort of trickles along So in this kind of temperature at the moment, it uses about 400 to 600 watts, which is not much at all. If you think of a kettle as sort of 2 to 3 kilowatts, to keep a whole 3-bed house warm for 400 to 600 watts is actually quite extraordinary. So because the heating is on constantly, and we didn't realise that this would be one of the benefits, but it actually heats the fabric of the house, the furniture, the fittings, the structure of the house, as much as it warms the air. So before, the radiators were belting out really hot air. It would make you feel warm until they went off, and then it got really cool quite quickly. Now everything to touch is warmer, and it lends a level of comfort that we weren't familiar with before. So that's one of the benefits. It's almost everyone that has a heat pump says the same thing, because it's just a more pleasant environment to live in.
What's the actual temperature your house is running at there?
So we've set it to 22 degrees, which we thought would be quite warm. Normally, previously, we had it about 19. But I think because of this fact that it's warm the whole time, we tried it at 19 and felt it was a bit cool. But yeah, it's 22 during the day and 20 at night, because it's better. As I say, it's better to leave it running constantly, even throughout the night. So you just drop it down a few degrees, let it continue running, and then it tops up to 22 again during the day. So in terms of what's and hows, it all boils down to, as I mentioned earlier, we want to use less energy, and what energy we do use, we want to use it more wisely, which is good for your pocket and good for the planet. And in terms of what, so first thing to look at is your EPC, if it's been updated recently. If it hasn't, it's worth getting it updated, because they'll give you a breakdown of what state the house is at.
Could you mention what EPC is? Not everyone.
Of course. No, good question. It's the Energy Performance Certificate. So it's a standardized measure of how well a house, and that's a good question actually. I think it's based on the running costs of the house in terms of heating and lighting. It's in the process, I think, of shifting possibly more towards also carbon emissions. I'm not entirely sure. It used to really negatively be affected by having a heat pump, because it says, oh, you've got a heat pump, that uses a lot of electricity. But it didn't take into account the fact that it's actually a lot more efficient than a gas boiler. But it's still a kind of a stick in the sand of roughly how good the house is. So, and it's quite a useful differentiator. If you're buying a house, you look at the EPC and think, wow, it's an A, or golly, it's a G, it'll cost a fortune to heat. So it's worth looking at that. I advise a bit of caution, because some of the things they put on it might be assumed. Like on ours, it assumed when we moved in that the cavity walls were insulated, but they weren't. So we actually had someone out and they drilled a hole in the wall and put a camera in, and they said it's not actually insulated. So it's a good point to start, but don't assume that everything it says is correct. The key really about what to improve, a lot of it comes down to the building fabric. So that's literally the structure of the house and how well it's insulated. So that includes loft insulation, cavity walls, glazing. We've still got the original double glazing, and I think none of them have blown, so they've still, they don't have condensation between them, so I think they're still okay. It's one of those things that you can spend an awful lot of money on for relatively little gain, so we've currently left them as they are. It's something that we could potentially do to replace, but as I say, it's quite a high cost. I've put coverings here because I didn't know what to call them. Curtains and shutters are actually quite useful. So anything that will trap extra air will help the house lose less heat. So when we moved in, most of the windows had shutters on. So at night we close them all, in the morning we open them. In our kitchen dining area, we've got some large glazing which I put motorized sort of roller blinds on, and we put those down at night as well. I can't really measure if they make much difference, but it's got to make some positive difference. So if you do have curtains, it's worth closing them at night. All these things make little incremental improvements. Drafts, like Suzanne was saying, a good point to start with. If you can feel drafts of cold air coming in places, it's quite an easy job, depending on how many there are, to seal those up. I've put fuel source because that can make a big difference to the running costs and the carbon emissions. So, as I'll mention later, generally moving to this green technology will save you money. There are certain combinations of technology that might mean it's a bit more expensive, but it really depends a lot on how you use it, especially tariffs. So for us, moving to a heat source has been a huge saving because we've got solar, we've got batteries, we can use cheaper electricity that you get overnight to run the house during the day. But if a heat pump has been designed poorly and it's oversized and it's running on, a standard day rate tariff, it'll cost a fortune. So it's worth, just kind of doing your research on the company you're going to use to install it, because they will be aware of all these things so that you don't need to be. But it's something to bear in mind that there can be quite a variation in running costs depending on all these pieces of the puzzle. Which is why I say heat pump, solar panels and a battery are they work together to make everything as cheap to run as possible. In terms of how you do it, as I was saying, I found it split into two. You've got the energy you put into the house and the energy you lose from it. You want to lose less so that you have to put in less. So as I say, fabric first, it's all about insulating. I don't know if you do that in Yateley, but in Fleet or Hart, there was a scheme where they would they would lend you for free a thermal imaging camera so you can go around the house and see where cold spots are. So I don't know if that's something that's available here. You can buy them. I did buy one that plugs into the bottom of my phone, and it's quite eye-opening actually to see where cold spots are, and they're often in places you wouldn't really expect. So that's worth investigating if you can. In terms of the input, as I said previously about the fuel source, that can make a big difference to the running cost of the house, as can load shifting and these time of use tariffs. Measuring what you're currently using and when is a great point to start because it's quite a low investment. So I put here it's an addiction warning. It can, as soon as you start measuring how much your house uses, and you get kind of a bit of satisfaction when you start to save energy, it's snowballs.
Like Suzanne and Julian. Watching our solar panels.
Yes. Yeah, as soon as you've got something like solar panels, you'll be looking at the app every 5 minutes thinking, ooh, look how much I'm generating. But so just as a sort of brief outline on a scale from easy to hardcore. Smart meters, a lot of people have them already. It is worth getting one if you haven't got one already because it starts to give you insights to what the house is using. Moving on, you can get these individual power meters which basically plug into a socket and then you can plug appliances into it. They are useful for things like TVs, if you're curious about how much energy a TV uses if it's left on standby all day, through to, does this washing machine says this is the economy cycle, is it really? And it will show you things like instantaneous power usage as well as how much cumulative energy something has used. So that's quite useful. Taking that a step further, you can get ones that have Wi-Fi so they can connect to your phone and then you can go into all the data a little bit more. If you take it a step further, you can also get clamps that you can clamp around wires mostly in your consumer unit meter box. And the final step, which is quite nerdy and exciting if you like that sort of thing, you can then connect all these different sensors into one platform that you can access on your phone or computer, and then it logs all this data. You can create graphs and do all sorts of clever things with it. And I've got quite a comprehensive system that I've developed over the years that allows me to monitor everything. Not everything, but many things. But it boils down to what I put at the top here. Once you're aware of what you're using, and you might be surprised how much you're using, then you can start working on reducing it. And often it doesn't take much effort to start reducing things. And particularly you might find which appliances in the house use the most energy, and then those things you can shift to using at other times of the day, where a tariff might allow you to use less, it'll allow the same use of a washing machine or dishwasher, it'll cost a fraction because of the reduced cost of the tariff at that time of day. So the grid, now this for me is really quite interesting, and I hope it'll be eye-opening for you as well. It's incredibly complicated, and there's a really interesting website called energydashboard.co.uk, and what you're looking at here is the last kind of 6-7 days of the entire country's energy usage. So if you have a smart meter, it might go up to, you know, a few kilowatts as a scale. Here we're talking gigawatts, so that's how much the whole country has used over the last 6 days, and the colours represent the different forms of energy, the energy source. So blue is gas, this sort of greeny colour is wind, and I specifically updated this for the last few days where it's been really windy, and so you can see kind of on the 24th of October there was a time where almost the whole country was running off wind. But it makes you realise that all these things are constantly changing. Orange is solar, so the little peaks during the day, obviously nothing at night. Purple is imports, so we rely quite a lot on imported energy as well. A couple of other things, we've got hydroelectricity, not really much of that at all. Coal, nothing, which is nice. PSH is something called pumped storage hydroelectric, which is where you pump a reservoir up a mountain, you store it there until the grid needs a big boost of short-term energy, and then you let all the water back down through turbines. There's not very much of that. Oh, that's this pink stuff here. So that will tend to be in the mornings and the evenings when you have the peak energy usage across the country, when everyone gets up, makes their cup of tea, or when they get home and make their cup of tea and put the oven on and so on. Brown is biomass, so burning wood chips, and then the grey is kind of a constant, that's nuclear. But to me that's really interesting, and it's an eye-opener to the fact that the grid is this really complicated thing that they're doing their best to manage it. But as you'll see on a subsequent slide, it's not perfect, and particularly with renewables, which are in themselves fantastic, they do introduce problems, such as having too much wind or solar on the grid, or having none at all when it's not windy. So I'll touch on that a bit in a minute. But ultimately, what I want to convey to you is the fact that if you want to save money, buy electricity when it's cheap, and if you can, sell it back to the grid when it's expensive. And I've got a graph that kind of shows that more simply in a second. Or at least do as much as you can when it's cheap if you can't sell it back. This is called load shifting. So essentially the simplest form is energy is cheaper in the night because there are few people up using energy, and energy is more expensive in the day. So that's why you can get something like an economy 7 tariff, where you get 7 hours of cheap electricity at night and the rest of the day is more expensive. If you can, you want to store the energy when it's cheap, and then you can use it in the day when it's more expensive. So our battery that we've got at home, the way we currently use it is that in the night we fully charge it with off-peak 7p per kilowatt hour electricity, and combined with the solar panels that keep it topped up in the day, the house basically doesn't use any on-peak electricity throughout the year. It does it in the winter when the battery's powering and heating the house. It isn't big enough to run the house the whole time. But that's how you can make huge savings. And this whole concept is where zero bills homes comes from. Because if you can do this constantly throughout the year and selling solar back into the grid, you can make money. Then across the whole year, that's where you can bring your average energy bill down to zero. So I'll briefly talk about Octopus, because for me they're one of the most innovative energy companies around, and they've really pioneered what we as the consumer can do to help the grid. And you might think, well, what can I, as one person out of 60 million, however many of us there are, I can't make any difference. But Octopus has so many customers now that if they have these things called either saving sessions or free electricity sessions. And so this was a recent saving session last Wednesday between 6 and 7. They will give you, they call them Octa points, but they're basically like nectar points. You can trade them in for money off your bills. And so for every kilowatt hour of electricity you use less between 6 and 7, they would pay you. And on the flip side, last Friday and Saturday was brilliant because it was so windy and sunny that, last Friday night between 9 and 10, they said, use as much electricity as you want. Just put everything on that you can, and just it's free. And so this is some data from my Home Assistant software. We were using a constant 17.7 kilowatts, charging 2 cars, running the heat pump to heat the water, had the oven on and everything. So that was all free. And the reason they can do this is that, and this is quite shocking really, if there's too much renewable energy going into the grid, so wind and solar, they actually have to pay those green renewable energy generators to turn off. So if you've ever driven past wind farms on a windy day and they're not turning, that's why. You think, well, what's this stupid technology? We've built it and it's not working. It's because it's working too well. And it all comes down to this balance. So at the moment, because we've built so much wind that there are times when it's really windy, we can't use it all at once. So at the moment, energy companies have to pay the wind farm operators to turn off. And that's cost the UK £1.1 billion this year, which is just mind-blowing. And so what Octopus are doing is they, instead of, okay, it's not going to make a vast difference yet, but they will, so instead of having to turn off these wind farms, why not let customers use as much electricity as they can for free, and then they have to pay the wind farmers less. So I haven't got the stats with me here of actually what. Yeah.
Could you the free electricity?
Yeah.
I was getting a bit confused because it's sometimes it's a little bit unclear about charging your EV, because it's kind of sort of says, oh, if you don't normally blah blah, and I'm trying to think, seriously, can I just put my car in?
Yes. So I haven't got the exact text, but it's. You're right, there's a subtle point that you have to bear in mind. It's free over and above what you would normally use at that time of day,
Yeah.
which, if you've got solar and house battery, we don't use anything at that time of day. And in that case, everything you use is free.
Yeah.
So it is a subtle point, and thank you for raising it. I don't know, you would need to know what you typically use during that time if you don't have solar or battery.
So if you've got an EV
Yeah,
and you're charging it on a normal day,
yeah.
that wouldn't count, for example.
Yeah.
I'm not to a salesman,
Yeah, no.
but is that what you're kind of saying? Is it?
Yes, I mean, between, say, 12 and 3 in the day or 9 and 10 at night, we wouldn't be charging an EV, for example, because that's still in the peak hours.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure you understand the
Basically,
concept.
Because, I've obviously got an EV tariff.
Yes.
So I'm on the 7p like you are. But,
Yeah.
so I could charge it during the day if I wanted to.
You could do. I mean, between 9 and 10,
Yeah.
typically.
I think they said something like you get a credit if you charge it in the day and you're on a low tariff. I read there in somewhere in the email or something.
Okay. It's worth definitely reading
Yeah,
the small print.
Yeah, it only says that you'll get free if you use above what you would normally use at that time of the day.
I was thinking about if you charge the car normally at night, then you charge it in that period there,
Yeah.
you really get credits.
So in that case, if
It
you...
doesn't say anything else about EVs, and then it doesn't
No,
put
I'm
this
just
as well.
using EVs because they use them more.
Yeah.
So, I mean, typically, a normal house between 9 and 10, you're probably not using that much. So, say you're using 1 kilowatt or something. If you put your EV on during that period, you'll basically get everything that goes into the EV will be free. So, it's I mean, between 12 and 3, maybe on a Saturday most of us would be out, the house wouldn't be using much anyway, so fill your boots. If you can, put as much on as you can then. But what I wanted to convey is this idea that bearing the grid in mind is what will make this whole green energy transition work. And it's really people power that will help. Because there's many people think, oh, well, what happens if everyone switched to electric cars? The grid will melt, the grid can't cope. And so that's where Octopus are, sorry if I sound like an Octopus salesman, I promise I'm not. I just find that there aren't any other utility providers doing anything near this level of innovation. So what was I going to say? Yeah, I've lost my train of thought. Oh yes, about the grid melting if everyone had EVs. So if everyone plugged in at the same time, the grid would struggle. But there are more and more chargers that are becoming available, as well as tariffs, that will actually stagger the charging. So we've got a charger that's compatible with what they call their intelligent Octopus Intelligent Go, Intelligent Octopus. And that makes the charger listen to the grid's demands and will turn on and off your EV charger during the night. So all you have to tell the charger is we want the car to reach 80% by the morning. It will then stagger that across all the millions of chargers to make it as efficient and spread as possible. And it's little things like that, as well as offering these free electricity sessions, that will help the grid cope. And saving and I've talked about that, saving sessions. So yes, I can go down very deep rabbit holes with these topics, so I think I should move on. So what I call this holy trinity of electrification. So today, technology exists that allows us to generate our own electricity locally to where it'll be used, so you're not losing any energy along pylons or transmission wires. You can store that electricity that you've generated yourself when you're not using it, which is really useful because most people are out during the day, during the week, and that's when it's most sunny or the most solar energy is generated when you're out, which doesn't make much sense otherwise. So you can store it to use later. You can buy cheap electricity from the grid to use when the electricity is more expensive, so that's what we do. You can then get paid for giving electricity back to the grid, which, by the way, during these saver sessions where they encourage you to use less energy in your house, that actually also means if you've got a home energy battery and you can set it to pump electricity into the grid, they'll pay you for it. Because effectively, if you normally used 5 kilowatts during this hour and you use 0, that's a 5 kilowatt reduction. If you give them 5 kilowatts, then that's also a reduction because you're using less than you would normally. Basically, they will pay you for being a mini power station for that hour. And we're only talking pounds, but it's quite useful. You can buy electricity when it's cheap. You can give it back to the grid when it's expensive. And then finally, you can use electricity you've generated yourself to heat your home. And you can't do that with gas, unless any of you have an oil well in your garden. So solar allows you to do the top 3, home battery, the middle 3, a heat pump, the last 2. And if you add them together, you get this new power up, which is what Octopus have coined the zero bills home. I say they've coined the term because they're actually working with housing developers across the country to build homes that have all of this technology built in from the get-go, to the point where they say for the first, I don't know what the term is, maybe 3-5 years, we won't charge you for your utility bills, because Octopus will manage the energy usage of the home. And so you can literally move into a new build home and you won't pay for any electricity usage, which I think is pretty cool, given what energy costs can be. So for those of you not familiar with
David,
this.
can I just ask one question?
Of course.
This shows my utter ignorance.
No question is too silly. Go for it.
Is the heat pump,
Mm-hmm.
and Raina's going to just ask me for this, but is a heat pump essentially a big air conditioner?
Yes.
Is that essentially what it is?
Yes.
Pretty much, yes.
Because I've never been too sure, and
So I'll briefly explain that on
no one
the.
take that out of this room.
So I'll briefly talk about that on the heat pump slide. But yes, it is effectively, or it's like a fridge in reverse. That's the other way you can look at it. Part of it gets cold, the other part gets hot. For a heat pump, the outside gets cold, your house gets hot. So solar panels, I'm sure we're all familiar with them. They turn sunlight into electricity that you can use in the house, or you can export and get paid for it. Obviously, you want to maximize the area of sunlight that you can capture, because ultimately, sorry for the tacky animation, it is like money is falling on your house, and if you collect it, you can use electricity yourself or get paid for it. So why wouldn't you collect as much as you can, is my logic. South facing is ideal because that's where the sun is mostly during the day. East-west is next best. Our previous house had an east-west facing roof, and it still works really well because you'll capture more of the morning and evening sunlight and less of the midday sunlight. You still generate a little bit less than if it was south facing. But really, going back to the money falling on your roof analogy, if there's any part of the house that gets sun, and you put a solar panel on it, you can use that energy which you would otherwise have paid for. Wall panels, I think I'm one of the few people, probably in the south of the UK, that has wall panels, because people just generally don't think of doing it. And it took me several years of thinking, should I, shouldn't I, can I, to actually go ahead and put these on. And it even confused the local council, as I said, because they initially said it's permitted development so long as it doesn't protrude more than 20 centimetres from the wall. I said that's fine, it won't. I put them up, and then I got a letter from the council saying you need to have planning application for this. So it's so rare that I think councils don't really understand the concept. They did then, with no quibble, grant me permission to keep them in the end. But what's interesting is that if you imagine, because the sun is at a certain angle in the sky, if you imagine in winter, you've got, if the sun is exactly at an angle between the roof and the wall, we actually generate the same amount on the roof as we do on the wall. And that changes during the year. So in the summer, we only generate 35% of the total output on the wall because the sun is so much higher. But again, going back to the analogy that you want as much surface area as possible, and if sun is hitting part of your house and you put a solar panel on it, you can capture that energy. Why wouldn't you? And what that's also done, normally a solar panel system, the kind of generation curve that you get throughout the year is like a sort of, they call it a bell curve. So it peaks in the summer and it tails off in the winter. What the wall panels have done for us is it's turned it from sort of a pointy thing to more like a square with rounded corners. Because in the winter we get, well, spring and autumn we get a lot more than we would have normally. And because the wall panels become less effective in the summer, they don't add so much to our kind of peak in the summer. So we're basically generating more constantly from April to September. Whereas previously the peak is really kind of June and a little bit either side of it. As I say, it might need planning permission to have it on your wall. Generally, roof panels don't need planning permission unless you're in a sort of conservation area. And I'm not familiar with those rules, but it's always worth checking. And as well as using the energy from the solar panels yourself, you can get paid for it if you give it back to the grid. For a long time, I wanted to use every drip of electricity we generated ourselves in the house. And if you want to be as super, super green as possible, that's probably the best way to do it, because you're using as little from the grid as possible. But what that means is that you're giving very little back to the grid, and so you're not being paid for any of that solar energy. So at one point I just thought, right, let's try another method and use the house battery to fill it at night with cheap energy, and then when the sun comes up it just tops up whatever the house has used between the cheap period ending and the sun coming up, and then everything we generate from the roof, from the solar panels, we just give back to the grid. And as you'll see later, you can make quite a lot of money doing that. So typically we've seen between April and September we were maybe getting between £60 and £100 a month that we were being paid by our energy supplier, which is kind of, the term energy supplier then doesn't make much sense because we're supplying them with energy and being paid for it. And that is what helps offset the cost of running an electric house in the winter. And then on average, I'm hoping it'll kind of cancel out. To what extent it cancels out, I'm not quite sure yet. But come back in February to see how it's worked.
You're still paying standing charge, right? So
yes.
That would be offsetting the standing charge then, because that's quite high actually.
It is. So there's a graph that I'll show you in a minute, and I did incorporate the standing charge cost into that. Mm-hmm. For us, it's about £19 a month standing charge. It's something like 30-40p a day or something. So yeah, it's really, the more you can give to the grid and be paid for it, the better. And we get paid 15p per kilowatt hour for giving energy back to the grid, and we buy it overnight at 7. So it's worth doing. It's worth using it for what the whole total energy consumption is of the house. You want to buy it when it's 7p and give as much away when it's 15p, and that's what's worked and generated us so much income. I say so much, it's like, you know, between £50 and £100 a month, but that's still pretty cool. Yeah, that's what I've just said. So it's entirely up to you. You might want to be as off-grid as possible and not rely on the grid, you know, be as off-grid as possible. And this whole concept of being, you know, zero bills is reliant on what the off-peak energy costs and how much you get paid when you give the energy back to the grid. We used to be on a fixed 15p export tariff. We're now on a flexible one that is currently still 15, but it might change. So all of this might go out of the window if they suddenly drop it to 2p, which is within their power to do so. And if that was the case, I would then revert back to using as much of the solar as I can myself. Ultimately, if you can be as independent of the grid as possible, then that's great. But at the moment, it works to work with the grid and pay and give money back, or give energy back, and then they pay you for it. At the moment, it's more economical to do that.
Have you got two batteries? Or just the one, both arrays filling up one?
One battery, two solar arrays. So to the battery, they don't care how many arrays you've got, they just see an input.
Okay.
So I'll now explain about how the battery works. It does look like we've got a big and a little one. That's the battery. This is some additional hardware, which I'll touch on in a moment. You can think of a battery as a reservoir for electricity. So if you think of like a water butt, collecting rainwater off your roof, you can't use all the rain that lands on your garden at the same time, or on your house, sorry, so you store it for use later. And this is exactly what a battery can do. So you can either fill it with excess solar energy. So by the way, I know there's a bullet point down here somewhere that mentions that. The house will use solar energy first, then it will draw from the battery, and then it will draw from the grid, in that order. So when I say excess solar not used by the house, so whatever the solar panels are generating, it'll go into the house first and then into the battery. You can fill it with cheap electricity from the grid overnight for use later. You can fill it with cheap, free electricity from energy providers when they have such sessions. And then you can draw from it when the grid electricity is expensive, or energy providers have saver sessions, and then you can push energy back into the grid and be paid for that as well. So yeah, the house draws from the solar panel first, then the battery, then the grid. Most batteries don't isolate the house from the grid, which is a shame. Basically, so by default, when we bought the battery, if there was a power cut, the battery would turn off, which is it doesn't make much sense. But basically, because the battery has the ability to give energy into the grid, if there was a power cut because a tree had fallen on some power lines, they don't want people with batteries continuing to push energy into the grid because it could electrocute the people trying to fix the problem on the grid. So by default, because it's extra hardware, batteries don't allow you to run the house if there's a power cut. With this little box, which Tesla call a gateway, that will detect the moment there is a power cut, and it basically opens a load of contactors and completely isolates the house from the grid, and in a flick of a millisecond switches the whole house over to running purely from the battery. We're not in an area that gets lots of power cuts, at least not in... that box was another £1,000. The battery itself we got with the solar panels, so I only know the total cost, but they're around 6,000–7,000. So it's quite a lot of cost for something that you might not use that often, because we don't generally get many power cuts. But it does also give you access and the ability to do more with the battery, including telling it, I want you to fully charge overnight during these hours, which by default it uses a smart algorithm to do that for you, which it never did very well. Yeah, other brands may well allow that. So the thing to consider with a battery is how big you need it and how much power it can give out and accept. So this battery we've got is the Powerwall 2, which is a couple of years old now. There's a Powerwall 3 that's come out to replace it. This can give you a maximum constant 5 kilowatts, which is actually quite a lot. It's not often you will use 5 kilowatts constantly. It's maybe if you're running the kettle and the oven, that's probably already about 5 kilowatts. So in those temporary moments where you might be drawing more than 5, the battery will provide 5, it will draw the rest from the grid at peak grid cost for those few minutes that you're using the grid. I think the Powerwall 3 can now do 7, which is better. And the other thing is the capacity. The input. So if you've got solar panels, it can only take a maximum of 5 kilowatts into the battery, which with our solar arrays, the absolute peak it'll ever generate in the middle of summer is about 6.5. So there are very few times in the year where we might generate so much that they can't all go into the battery and some will go into the grid. but because of the way we use it, we always keep the battery full during the day and we give everything to the grid anyway, so that's not such an issue. The capacity is the other thing to think about. So that's this term kilowatt hours means it can provide 13.5 kilowatts for an hour, which it can't do because it can only give you 5 constantly. But basically, it's how big that reservoir is. So in the winter, this isn't big enough to run the whole house when it's cold and the heat pump's running, and we want to use the oven and the microwave at the same time. So in the cold months, we will drain the battery completely of our free energy that our cheap electricity that we bought in from the grid overnight, and then we'll be using on-peak high cost energy during the day. But that is when we start using this big pile of money that we made during the summer when we were giving all that solar to the grid. So we generate more than we need in the summer, and that offsets this extra energy we use in the winter. It should do. And as you'll see from the graphs later, we're probably going to average out to hopefully around £0. So the heat pump, if you believe what the media says about them, they're terribly expensive, inefficient, people hate them. The media love negative news stories, as I'm sure you're all aware. They love focusing on the 0.1% of the population that have had problems with them. They're fantastic bits of kit in my experience, and in many people's experience. They just don't feel the need to actually share those positive news stories with everyone. As the gentleman here was asking, what exactly is it? How does it work? It is basically like a fridge or an air conditioner. Everyone's familiar with an air conditioner that makes your room cold. Part of the air conditioning unit, the bit that sits outside, gets really warm as a result. You're effectively moving heat from the inside of the house to the outside. That's really as basic as it gets. And a heat pump does the reverse. So if you stand next to one of these things when it's heating the house, that's actually quite cold, the air that's coming out of that fan. So it's the same principle, just working in reverse. And what makes it so magic, in my mind, is that if you take a fan heater, one that you plug into the wall, you turn it on and it blows hot air out, that turns 100% of the electricity into heat. So you could call it 100% efficient. A heat pump can actually be up to 400 or sometimes more % efficient. So if you put 1 kilowatt of energy into a heat pump, you can get up to 4 kilowatts out, which seems to defy logic. But I liken it to the way that we thought filament light bulbs were the best way of generating light until someone invented the LED, and you can get the same amount of light output for like 1/10 of the energy input. So it's really neat, and that's what allows it to be comparable, if not cheaper, than gas, because gas is very cheap because it's heavily subsidized, whereas electricity is not so cheap unless you're using these clever time of day tariffs, as I'll explain in a bit. In terms of making it as cost effective to run as possible, you want the heat pump to do as little work as possible. Its job is to heat water, and the water will either go through your radiators or it'll go through a coil in your hot water cylinder to heat your hot water. The less it has to heat the water, the less electricity it'll use, the less it will cost you. So you want the largest area of heat emitters, which is a fancy term for a radiator, as possible. So underfloor heating is ideal, and everyone will say, oh, heat pumps only work if you've got underfloor heating. They'll be really efficient if you've got underfloor heating. They will work no matter what heat radiators you've got. The issue is, whilst they can heat water to the same temperature as a gas boiler, the modern heat pumps anyway, doing so is really inefficient, because the hotter you ask the heat pump to heat the water, the more electricity it'll use, and it's not linear. It's kind of exponential. I think so anyway. So the idea is you want it to heat the water as little as possible. So if you want the house to still be warm, if the water in the radiators is cooler, you need more surface area to emit that lower temperature heat. You need more of it. So yes, if you want an efficient heat pump system, it is highly recommended that you upgrade your radiators to not necessarily longer or taller ones, but often deeper ones, because these ones, so that's what was in our house. It's like really thin, it was only that thin. And that worked because the water going through it was like 60 degrees from the gas boiler. This one is about that thick, and the water typically is between 30 to, if it's really cold, 45 degrees. And you'd think, well, if the water's so tepid, surely it's not going to heat the house. But it does. I can assure you the house is very comfortable. And what you'll find is companies like, well, any company that fits heat pumps, they'll probably give you a range of options. If you want to pay more money up front and they replace your radiators for you, you'll end up with a system that costs less to run in the long run. They can also provide you with an option that's cheaper up front, but they won't replace any of the radiators. It will have to work harder and it'll use more energy. So there's no right solution. The rightest, cheapest, or lowest energy consumption solution is to be underfloor heating, because that will typically run at sort of 25 to 30 degrees, which means the heat pump is only raising the temperature of the water by a couple of degrees, and that's really, really efficient. And then you can get possibly anything up to 500% efficient, which is amazing. So the key things to make a heat pump the cheapest to run is going back to what I said at the beginning, you want to keep as much of that heat in your house as possible. So insulate first, play with technology later. Even if you did nothing else after this talk, but you insulated your house better, you will pay less for your energy bills. It's as simple as that. If you have a well-insulated house, then it does make sense to use this technology because it'll then cost you even less to heat it. So you want large radiators, and what makes it really cheap is to use off-peak electricity. And that's where having the battery can come in, because you can run the heat pump effectively for 9 months of the year with 7p per kilowatt hour electricity, which is the cheapest it can get pretty much. And by heating it constantly and gently, that'll use less electricity as well. It is a different mindset that you have to sort of switch to, because we're probably, if you've got a gas boiler, you're used to having it coming on in the morning, off during the day, on in the evening, and you think, well, it's a bit of a waste to have the heat pump running the whole day when we're out. But actually, if you look at the data, it'll use more energy overall if you really make it work hard in the morning to raise the temperature of the house to a comfortable level. Then you let it turn off, the house cools down, and then you're getting it to work really hard in the evening. It's more economical to let it run constantly. And then you get the benefit that I mentioned of it heating the fabric, the furniture, even things like the bed. We noticed previously the bed would always be really cold to the touch. So when you get into it at night, it's like, oh, quick, it's really cold, pull the duvets over. But now the bed is actually warm when you get into it because it's been slowly warmed all day. Planning permission with heat pumps is interesting, and I'm really not the expert on it because the regulations keep changing. So we had to get permission because we've put ours on the front of our house because we didn't want it in our garden at the back because the garden is quite small. And there was a regulation that meant if it's facing a highway, you needed planning permission. There was another regulation that if it was closer than 1 meter to your boundary of your title deeds, you have to have planning permission. I believe that's now been removed. One of the other issues was with noise. I think they're tweaking the restrictions on noise as well, and as I'll show you, I've got a video here. they're not actually that noisy. So they do a noise calculation based on the size of the unit, its power rating, and the distance from the heat pump to your nearest neighbour's door or window, which in our case is that window there of our neighbour, which is about 8 metres away. And the calculation they did showed that we were literally right on the borderline of being acceptable, which, as you'll see from the video, I think is a bit overkill, because the heat pump is literally completely inaudible from that window and barely audible from our front door. So I hope this comes across. So this is a very quiet neighbourhood. Pump is currently on, as you can see by the leaves moving. But it's barely more than like an office fan. And according to the original regs, we were just barely at the limit for the neighbour's next door window, which was here. And you actually can't hear it. So it's obviously regulations for people with super sensitive hearing or microphones sticking out of their windows or something. It helped that it was partially blocked by the bush and the brick wall as well. It's about as loud as it'll get. So I liken it to the sound of a big office fan, you know, one of these pedestal fans that you get in an office. It's a sort of low, it's hard to do an impression of it. I understand why there are restrictions on noise, and I think it will be an issue if we're trying to get however many hundreds of thousands of pumps installed across the country, because not everyone has that luxury of having your neighbour's window 8 metres plus away from where the pump is going to be fitted. So in reality, the pump is mostly running during the winter, during the colder months, when everyone's indoors anyway. So that's kind of my logic of why I think they're a little bit too overcautious at the moment with the regulations. That said, if you have a bigger house, you will need a bigger pump that will make more noise. So they've got systems in place for calculating the noise output. And fortunately, as I say, because of where the pump was, or is, it's partly shielded by the porch from our neighbour's window. And so that was actually taken into account, and that reduced the... It meant we could have a pump there, whereas if the porch wasn't there, we couldn't have, because it wasn't shielded from the sound.
What's the backup location if you couldn't put it in front of it, just around the corner?
So, just quickly show you. So originally, I wanted to have it behind this bush down the side of the road. So that was even further away from all our neighbours. But I put in planning application for it there, and it turns out that there's a weird strip of grass down the side here that's actually amenity land, which we're not allowed to put things on. So I then had to reapply for planning to have it there. If that had failed, we would have put it in the back garden, which it would have worked absolutely fine.
Would you not have had the same distance issue in the back garden for windows at the back of the house?
So I don't have a picture of the back garden. So we have a single story extension that would completely shield it from all our neighbours. So yes, without that there, the distance would have been the same to the neighbouring window. The one thing to bear in mind is that you need a certain amount of free air space around the pump. It's about 1 metre in front and sort of ½ metre to each side. And so it basically means you can't put tables and chairs up against it, because it will, effectively the air coming out here will get rediverted back in before it's had a chance to warm up, and that can affect the efficiency. Basically it would have meant we'd have had a void in our back garden that we didn't want. A bit selfish, perhaps, but in a way I wanted it in the front so that people would ask you, oh, is that a heat pump? How does it work? How do you like it? And I wanted it to be a conversation starter, which it has been.
Do you polish it That's really
Not that often, no.
Does it get clogged up by general, rubbish?
Good question, actually. So in the same way you need an annual gas boiler service, you do need to have it serviced annually. But it's really, there's so little that can go wrong with it. It is more about cleaning it. So on the back, which you obviously can't see here, there are very, very fine metal fins, which is what allows the heat transfer to be as efficient as possible. Because there's air being constantly passed through that, it can get clogged up with leaves, particularly if you're in an area that has a lot of leaves and dust blowing around. So the annual service is mostly to do with keeping the unit clean. Where it is there, it shouldn't be much of a problem. If it was, say, in a very dusty environment where there was a lot of wind that kind of whistled around and blew lots of debris in, then it might be more of a problem. And then the only other things they do in the annual service, which we haven't actually had yet, because we haven't had it a year, is I think just making sure that pressures are at the right levels. Yeah, I don't actually know what they do. You can get, we have a service plan where you pay like £9 a month, and at the end of the year you get they come and do the service for you. Although the first year is actually free, so they'll come and do the first service for free. So what did it all cost? It's the big question. I put this little caveat in that the price of the systems that you can put in will vary hugely depending on your individual circumstances. So this is what we've paid to do all the improvements that I mentioned in that first table. And as I mentioned earlier, heat pump prices in particular can vary a lot depending on how efficient you want the system to be. Also, you might not have a roof that can have solar panels on, or you might have a huge roof that you can put loads of panels on. There are lots of variables. So we've spent over 6 years about £24,000 on all these different things. So the heat pump, we were quite lucky. We had it installed by Octopus. I'm not an Octopus rep, but they were, we actually started the heat pump journey in 2023, and we had it installed in February 2025. There was a lot of backwards and forwards, a lot of design changes, a lot of which was actually caused by me because I was trying to force them to give us a more efficient system by putting bigger radiators in. They now don't do that. They were doing a lot of loss leader installations, so they were basically making a loss on all their early systems that they put in to try and build up their expertise, get as many pumps out there as possible. So we actually only paid about £1,080 for the pump after the £7,500 boiler upgrade scheme grant. If you go onto the Octopus website now, and I put my address and postcode in and house number, it's about £3,900. So it has gone up, but that £1,000 was a bit unrealistic. They have, as I say, a range of options, which I now can't see unless I start engaging with them in a conversation about having a heat pump installed, which I don't need to do because I've already got one. That can range between sort of 3,000 and 6,000, depending on the efficiency that you want. So it's up to you to decide, do you want a more efficient system that will cost less to run in the long term, or you don't want to pay as much up front and you'll have a system that's more expensive to run in the long term. That will vary a lot depending on the size of the house, how well it's insulated, and in fact, when you put your address details into a site like the Octopus heat pump quote generator thing, it will look up your current EPC rating to see how well insulated the house is at the moment, and then it will base their quote on that. So it's worth getting the EPC updated before you start thinking if you're going to have a heat pump, because they use that as an indication of how big a heat pump you'll need. So if they look at it, the EPC, and it says it's really a poorly insulated house, they'll recommend a big heat pump for you, which is not going to be efficient and is going to be very expensive to buy initially as well as to operate. Something to bear in mind is that there are, well, firstly, there are various other grants available like Eco4 and the Warm Homes Grant. I know very little about them, but they can provide contributions toward the cost of any of this green technology or improvements to your home in terms of insulation based on your income and the current state of the home. So if it's an EPC that's very low, they're more likely to give you grants to help you improve that. Also, a nice surprise that we found is that a lot of mortgage providers are giving cashback incentives, grants for installing green tech. So we're with Halifax at the moment and they gave us £2,000, just like that, for a pump that only cost us £1,080, which was amazing because they just give you £2,000 even if you didn't pay that much for the heat pump. If we got a heat pump now, it would cost more than £1,080, but yeah, we basically got a heat pump for free with that grant. It's a good question. I think part of it is once one mortgage provider started offering it, everyone had to. But I think it's, yeah, I don't quite understand why they're doing it, other than to look good, perhaps.
Because that is quite a lot of money.
It is.
Grand total.
Oh, that money, yes, sorry.
I was thinking about, you won't want to move house out of it.
Yes, that's a very good point. So if you are planning to, or you think you might be moving soon, I would focus on the less expensive options. We're hoping to stay in this house for a very long time. So I did, as a kind of exercise, work out, if you remember right at the beginning, looking at the average monthly utility bill cost for running the house. Across the year, it's about £2,000 or £3,000 of utility bills. If you kind of divide that number by what it costs and the fact that we now have a house that has no utility bills effectively, you get the payback period, which if it's £3,000 we would have been paying, it's about 8 years. So that can help guide you whether you think it's worth investing that much money. And also, just going back to these mortgage provider cashbacks, they have different cashbacks depending on what you're putting in, and I think you can get more than one. So if you're putting heat pumps in, it was £2,000. If it's solar panels, it's £1,500. If it's insulation, it's something else. So definitely look around for what grants are available. I didn't want to put any more details in here because it's changing constantly. But bear also in mind that so we had the roof panels, the battery and the gateway put in 2019, and it was £15,200. The price of solar panels, batteries have come down a lot in 6 years. I've seen not dissimilar setups available for 7,000 or 8,000 now. So don't be overly concerned by that figure because that's historic. It wouldn't cost that much now if we were to do it again. Although that said, we got a good rate on our heat pump. Insulation is pretty cheap, so if you're going to do anything, I would focus on insulating the house first. I think the loft was probably about £150 for the 10 or so rolls of insulation that we got and put in ourselves. If you pay someone to do it, it's obviously going to be a bit more expensive. We got the cavity walls insulated when there was a thing called the Green Homes Grant, which doesn't exist anymore. They paid about £1,000 towards it, so that would have been £1,500. We paid £560. And then we went a bit over the top. We had extra insulation put in above our garage. So you can't really see it there. So the garage had very little insulation above it. So the room above it, which was our ensuite bathroom, got really cold. So we had extra insulation put in there. Also, this decorative, sticky-outy window in our bedroom had no insulation whatsoever underneath it, so it got really cold. So we had someone take that off and insulate that as well. That won't give you a return on investment, but we thought we might as well do it if we're going to insulate as much of the house as we can. So I'm getting towards the end, you'll be pleased to hear. Part of what I liked about putting this talk together was it actually made me look at what the house costs to run now. And because of all the sensors and stuff I've got in the house, I've got historical data I can look at, as well as utility bills, to actually see what it's costing and how it's going to pay for itself over time. As I've mentioned, indirectly during the talk, you could have two houses that are identical with the same hardware, and if they're used in a different way, one house will be a lot cheaper to run than the other, which comes down a lot to these tariffs. So that's something to bear in mind. Tariffs make a huge difference. There are different tariffs available. If you don't have an electric car, there are still different tariffs that are geared towards making it more cost effective to use a heat pump. But the tariffs you get if you have an EV and an EV charger are probably the best you can get. Again, something to bear in mind. So we get 7p between 11:30 and 5:30, and 29p the rest of the time, and we get 15p to export if we export to the grid. So looking back at the data so far, from February when we had the pump installed to now, well, to the end of September, the pump has used 1,285 kilowatt hours, but because during that period it's been 330% efficient, it's generated 4,500 kilowatt hours of heat. Now, if you, I don't know exactly if the pump has been always using off-peak energy, but for the sake of this simple calculation, this shows what a difference tariffs can make. So by having the battery that stores off-peak cheap electricity overnight, and pretty much in that period, February to September, we've drawn very little on-peak energy from the grid. So for the sake of argument, let's say that amount of energy costs 7p per kilowatt hour. It's cost us £90 to run the heat pump for those however many months that is, which is not much. If we didn't have the battery and all these fancy tariffs, it would have cost £373, which is still not too bad. Out of interest, I looked at what we were paying for gas before we had the gas boiler removed. That's only 5.6p a kilowatt hour, but it's only 90% efficient. So you have to use the heat figure, increase it by the fact that it's 90% efficient, and then I got a figure of 282. So it shows you that gas sits between what a heat pump could cost to run on electric, depending on what tariffs you're using. So I thought that was quite interesting. Now some graphs, because everyone loves a graph. And I thought this was quite interesting. So what we're looking at is red is on-peak electricity usage, so that's 29p. In February it was still very cold, so our battery wasn't lasting the whole day, so I think quite a bit of that was running the heat pump during the day when it was really cold. But you can see since March to August it's kind of flatlined. We've barely used any on-peak electricity at all, so the rest has all been 7p, and that's what the blue line is. So that's what we've been using to run the heat pump and run the house, lights, electricity and everything. I've managed to extract from that the cost of charging 2 electric cars, which is the magenta line, because not everyone has an electric car, and so I wanted to show. And this zero bills concept doesn't include charging electric cars because they use a lot of energy. So And then the green line is what we've been paid for exporting our solar energy. So obviously there's not much in the winter, and it rises quite quickly until we were already peaking in about April. So we were getting £100 a month just for giving all of our excess solar back to the grid. And then this graph is cumulative, so it's kind of what you've paid or what you've earned additionally each month. So starting from here, if we look at green is imported energy, so that's running the house with just on its own, so not taking export payments into account. So for those, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months, it's cost us about £325 to run the house and the heat pump. If you then add what we've been paid with export payments in and look at the green dotted line, we kind of broke even after about 2 months. And then since then, we've just been collecting money basically every month. So at the moment, at the end of September, we have about £300 positive cash in the pot, which I'm hoping will last us through to next February. We'll have to see how that works. But it's certainly kind of going in the right direction. And then just for interest, if you include charging 2 electric cars as well, we kind of broke even in about June. But yeah, it won't be a 0 bills plus 0 EV charging cost house. But I thought that was quite interesting just to show how this technology can help save you money, basically. So we're reaching the end, which you'll probably be glad to hear. A few other interesting nuggets that I thought I'd share. Vehicle to grid is coming soonish. It's taken a long time to come. This basically means if you have an EV that's compatible and you have a EV charger that's compatible, in the same way that, well, not same way, the grid, and with all its varying requirements, will actually be able to put energy into your car and take it out and pay you for whatever energy it's used. And that will, A, help the grid cope with the growing number of electric cars, but it'll also mean that you get paid quite a bit for being effectively a temporary energy storage solution. There's some discussion about, oh, won't it wear my car battery out? But in the tests that they've done and the data that's constantly being collected, it makes such a small difference it's almost negligible. The problem is it needs a special charger, and 95% of chargers can't do it yet. It's coming. But interestingly, Octopus they've got a separate division called Octopus Electric Vehicles, I think, and they do electric vehicle leasing. And they've created a £300 a month lease for a BYD Dolphin. It's an electric car, Chinese car. They throw in a bidirectional charger and you don't have to pay to charge your car because of this whole 0 bills home concept. Well, it's more because they manage the flow of electricity into and out of the car, and that will help save them money, and so they pass those savings on to you as the customer. So you can have a brand new car for £300 a month, free charger and no charging costs, which is pretty cool, and shows what's possible when you start using this technology in a very innovative way. This is something else that you could consider. So because with a Tesla home battery, you can only expand it with another Tesla battery, which is quite expensive. It's worth considering if you have a battery. There are different manufacturers that offer smaller modules, so you can stack the modules to build whatever size battery you want. With a Tesla, you can do that, but the batteries are so big, we don't need 2. We could do with 1.5, but you can't have 1.5, you need 2. So when we go camping, I wanted to be able to run everything. We've gone off gas when camping as well. We've got an electric hob that we take with us, And this is actually effectively a baby home energy storage battery. It's 2 kilowatt hours instead of 13.5, which the Tesla one has. And I effectively use this to power my home office using off-peak energy. So I've got a Wi-Fi controlled socket which charges this overnight during the off-peak hours, and then during the day that one socket runs my laptop and my screens and hard drives and stuff. This particular brand, Jackery, you can plug solar panels into it. So you could make your home office, if you've got a home office in the garden, completely off-grid by having one of those and some solar panels on the roof. And then you don't need to faff about working with the grid to make sure that you're... because when you have solar panels put on the roof, you need to tell the national grid that you're doing it, because they need to know, okay, there's going to be extra electricity coming into the grid in this sector. But this is entirely within the house. So I thought I'd mention it, because it's something else that you could consider. Something I know, I've forgotten your name. Ken. The father of one of our neighbours, lovely man. I think you've retrofitted this into your house. It's called mechanical ventilation and heat recovery. They put it into new builds, well, most new builds these days. It's a way of keeping all your doors and windows shut, but still having fresh air in the house. So essentially, it takes in, or if you've got stale warm air inside, it pumps it out through filters, and it exchanges the heat into this little module in the middle, and then the stale air is then cold and goes outside, and then it takes in fresh cold air, reheats it, and then pumps it back into the house. So this is the ultimate nerdy way to be super airtight with your house. Because if you think when you turn the bathroom extractor fan on, your lovely warm air that you've spent energy, electricity and cost heating, you just pump it all outside. This is a way of keeping that heat in the house. But I'd imagine it wasn't easy. It's very...
Still one more duct to run.
Right.
That means building a stud wall as well.
Okay. I thought I'd mention it though, because it's something else that one could do. Last slide, scale of investment. So I've talked about all these different things during the talk, and this gives you a sense of what you can do to your house based on how much you want to spend. So at the cheapest end, these two are basically free. If your local council can rent a thermal imaging camera, it's really worth using and taking them up on that.
Hogg does have a scheme for volunteers come to your house with a camera.
Okay.
And then pass them over to you. So you don't get hold of the camera.
Okay.
It's the service.
So you get the results and the pictures and the recommendations.
You do it after Christmas for a couple of months
Hmm.
during the winter time.
Yes.
Mine's being done next week.
Ah, brilliant. Yes, it's worth only doing that in the winter, because you want the outside of the house to be as cold as possible, because then you see where the cold is getting in. And it can be quite surprising where the cold is coming in. Obviously around windows and doors is where you get a lot of leaks and drafts. But you will also discover where the new build house companies have bodged and not bothered to put insulation, so that can then help you target where you put extra insulation, especially in the loft, because you'll see if the loft has been insulated, you'll see it's mostly kind of red or yellow if it's warm and blue if it's cold, and suddenly you can see there are patches where they've missed it. Okay, these are all really small improvements, but it all kind of adds up. Changing tariff is probably free, and it's worth looking into. Sealing gaps, as I mentioned. Energy monitors, they're pretty cheap. They help you start your journey on to reducing energy usage. Loft insulation, cavity walls are a bit more expensive. That little Jackery battery, that particular one was about £800. It will pay itself back eventually. This mechanical ventilation, I imagine, is not cheap. it's quite a lot of kit and labour to put it in, unless you have a kin. I probably wouldn't recommend that retrofitting underfloor heating, because everything in the house has to come out, the floor comes up to put the piping in. That's best done on new builds. New windows, I think, are very expensive. We've not even looked into the cost, but it's probably quite a lot and probably won't give you much return on the investment. Ironically, the greatest return on your investment will come from making the biggest investments, in my mind anyway. Switching to an EV, if you can charge it at home, will save you money on a petrol car. If you can't charge it at home, it's possibly going to be borderline, just because charging it publicly is quite expensive at the moment. But if you do have one and can charge at home, it's becomes a very cheap way of running a car. And then, because the cost of heat pumps, panels, solar panels and batteries is so variable, they could kind of be anywhere in the last half of that graph, so I've just put them all in one place. But hopefully this talk will have showed you that using those three things together allows you to really cut down your utility bills. A few shameless plugs. If you want £50 off joining Octopus, scan this QR code, and then I get £50 as well. They also have another voucher code. If you want a heat pump installed, you can get £100 off. Email me if you're interested. I found some random voucher code on the internet when we had our pump installed. And so some random guy who put the code on the internet has probably got £100 when I had my pump installed. So thank you to him, whoever he is. If you're interested in just learning more about green technology, I'd highly recommend the Everything Electric Tech channel on YouTube. It's run by, well, it started originally by Robert Llewellyn, who you might have known from Red Dwarf, Scrap Heap Challenge, and programs like that. He's been running it for about 15 years. He started it just filming himself. It's now grown into a massive global presence. You may have been aware of Everything Electric Farnborough that took place last weekend or the weekend before. It's basically a huge event dedicated to educating the public about renewable energy technology, and you can test drive all sorts of electric cars. They're not funded by anyone. They initially had you could donate to them to help them run their YouTube channel. Now they're self-funding through their events that they put on around the world. A really feel-good, inspirational group of people, and really interesting the way they put their videos across. And they have two channels, one for technology like heat pumps and Zero Bills Homes. In fact, there's a great video on there about how the Zero Bills Homes concept works. They have a separate channel for car reviews. And if you want to really geek out on heat pumps, look up Heat Geek. They are mind-blowingly, they really have found a way to convey really complex topics in a really understandable way. So I'd highly recommend that as well. Well done. You reached the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Do you have any questions, or do you just want to go home and sleep?
David, what do you do on the hot days, the few hot days we have? What do you do then with heat pump?
So there will be a time when the house doesn't need heating. The hot water, you're all...
cooling, right?
So, good question. You can get heat pumps that can be operated in reverse and can cool the water going to your radiators, but I've not heard any good things about that, because it basically makes your radiators really cold and then they get covered in condensation, which drips off. So what we do have, and we had that put in a couple of years ago, is an air conditioner, the traditional type. So there's a box outside my home office, and we've got one of these fan units on the wall and one in the bedroom. So again, being electric, you can use the sun, the power of the sun that's making you so hot to cool you down. So that's worth having as well. But you will, so you won't need the heat pump to heat the house all year round. You do still need it to heat the hot water. And helpfully, because you might remember I said you want...
rely just on solar panels, just to heat the water?
You can do, yeah. Before we decided to always put what we generate from the solar panels into the grid, we would wait until it was sunny and then we would heat the hot water. And that's a really low-cost way of doing it. It's just more cost-effective to give all your solar to the grid. Yeah?
So on the cooling, there has just been a consultation conducted by the government, which is looking at bringing air-to-air heat pumps that provide both heating and cooling into the boiler upgrade scheme.
Interesting.
And that's the direction that we're considering going. But from talking to people, and I'll give a plug here to the National Self-Build and Renovation Centre in Swindon, which is well worth looking up. If you just type Google NSBRC, you'll find it. And they run a number of workshops and shows throughout the year. Really good value to go down. It's free to get in. Lots of presentations and seminars given. But the tips we were getting is, don't do it now, wait for 9 months when it's in the upgrade scheme.
Interesting.
On the other side is you talk to people that say, don't wait now, or don't wait for the boiler upgrade, do it now because you'll get it cheaper because you won't have to go to an MCS accredited supplier. So it's balancing it.
Yeah. We did actually consider, so there are two types of heat pump. Air to air, which is what Ken mentioned, which is what you typically have for cooling the house. And that's the reason it's called air to air, is that you've got a unit outside that takes energy. Well, if you're cooling the house, you're taking the heat energy inside from the air, and you're moving it to the air outside. The other type is air to water. So you've got the unit outside, which is cooling and heating the air, cooling the air, and the energy goes into the water, which is in your radiators. So you've got air to air and air to water. Because we already had these two units, one in my home office, one in our bedroom, which can both heat and cool the air, I was seriously considering, rather than a heat pump, having a couple more of those dotted around the house. But because it wasn't part of the boiler upgrade scheme, it would have been about £6,000. We'd probably have needed 4 or 5 more of these units. And also on the Heat Geek YouTube channel, the guy did a really interesting comparison between what it's like to have air to air versus air to water. And it raised some points that I hadn't really considered, like air to air is constantly you're blowing air around the house, and that can actually make your sort of skin dry out more because you've got drafts on you the whole time. You would also, you'd need a solution for heating your hot water, because these air to air units don't heat hot water, but I can tell someone's going to say, but you can now get a hot water cylinder that has a heat pump built into it, which you can. So on balance, because at least at the time it wasn't part of the upgrade scheme, it would have cost a lot more. But having had a heat pump fitted, I'm very, very pleased with it. And I'm glad I didn't go down the air-to-air route. I think it's a bit more discreet because you're only heating the radiators. You don't have to have these other units on the wall, which was another reason we didn't go down the route, because my wife doesn't like them. She finds them too ugly, which is a fair point. Technically, it is actually more efficient than an air-to-water system, because you're not wasting heat and energy heating water that travels through pipes, leaking energy before it gets to the radiators. It's meant to be more economical, but yeah, it's worth looking at the pros and cons. Yeah.
How often and how much would it cost to maintain your roof solar panels? Maintain and clean?
Good question. So we had them put in 2019. I've cleaned them once myself with a very long stick and a brush on the end, and because of the timings of when I did it, I actually only cleaned the bottom row one day and the top row the next day, so I actually had comparable data of how much difference it makes cleaning them, and it was about 4% over 5 years. So it's probably, you're going to spend more paying a company to clean them than you're actually going to make back. So they are really very, very low maintenance. They do have a stated kind of guarantee period, and they say they will lose generation capacity during that time. It's usually at the end of 25 years. Well, if they have a 25-year guarantee, at the end of that period, it will still generate at least 80% of what it was rated to generate when new. Similar to guarantees on electric car batteries, they say after so many tens of hundreds of thousands of miles, you'll still have 80% capacity of what it was new. But there's really very little, if anything, to service on solar panels, unless you have trees nearby that might drop sap or stuff that makes them really dirty. We don't have trees that close by, and so there's nothing that really makes them dirty. They generally get cleaned well enough by the rain. So,
Pigeons. We had to have ours recently pigeon-proofed.
Ah, yes.
They're an older type which sit prouder than yours do. So there's a base there for pigeons to get in. So, but I concur with what you said. I mean, we've had panels since 2011, and really they haven't particularly degraded in output. And it was only the pigeon-proofers that actually cleaned them. That's the first time I've ever had them cleaned.
That was likewise with us from 2011 to 2023. And I was surprised how much lichen was growing on them.
Yeah.
I actually looked at the panels with binoculars and I thought it was just pigeon poo.
There's lichen.
Lichen that was growing.
Interesting. I thought the pigeons aren't going to nest under there, that's fine, so I chose not to have the optional pigeon proofing put in. And then we were getting woken at 5 a.m. every morning in the summer with and a week later we paid a premium to have it retrofitted, because it's a tiny gap, but they did manage to get underneath it. I mean, yeah, it's like that much, but they squish themselves in just so they can make noises above your bedroom at 5 in the morning.
In fact, after having the screens put on, we actually had a pigeon muscle its way in. It actually found
oh no,
where it hadn't been fitted to, and it had dented up underneath.
I have solar hot water, and there's there's a kind of psychological battle going on between me and the pigeons. That they keep pulling the thermocouple out of the solar hot water system.
Oh wow.
So it stops working, and I have to hire somebody to go up on the roof because I'm scaredy and I won't go up there, and stick it back in, and then the next day, or a few days later, the pigeons, I pulled it out again. So I've got to figure that one out.
So what they can do is they can go up in your loft where the pipe comes in. They can poke a solar thermocouple into the pipe inside the loft.
Okay.
Just underneath the insulation. And then they can tweak a control in the control system.
That's a very, very good idea. Because sorry. Solar pigeon issues. Yeah, okay, thank you. That's a very good idea.
That's an interesting point which I never really researched. You can get solar hot water heating panels, which are effectively, it's like having a radiator sat on your roof that's black, and the water will flow through it and get warmed up by the sun. I can't speak with any level of experience or authority of whether it's worth having that versus an electric solar panel system that you can then use to heat your water. So it's again something worth looking into.
I think, my observation would be we had it done because at the time the location wasn't ideal, and solar hot water is quite good for oblique sun, and it will also work in indirect, so you don't actually need direct sunlight even, but it's a niche now, I think, and I think looking back I probably would go for what you've done if I was doing it again, and use the excess electricity to heat hot water, because as with all plumbing problems, it's a plumbing problem and it's a plumbing problem on your roof.
Yeah.
And over a long time, I think, I think we probably would have gone electric, but that was just our experience.
You raise a good point there, because if you're not able to have a house battery, you can get little electric clever boxes that will, if you're not wanting to put your excess solar into the grid, there's a box that will detect if you've got excess solar generation, and then it'll put it into your hot water tank. So it's probably not, if you don't have a heat pump, so you can just have excess solar going into an immersion element in a standard heat pump, standard hot water cylinder. So that's another thing that is there's less investment involved. If you just have solar panels, you can use that to heat your hot tank, which then means you don't need to run the gas boiler as much. So, yeah, so thanks for mentioning that.
So we've still got a gas boiler, but I've fiddled about and now run with the solar thermal and just top it up with the immersion heater. And that's cheaper than using gas.
Any more questions?
Yeah?
Did you do anything on improving the general air tightness of the house?
Not really, no. I just used the thermal camera that I bought to see if there were drafts, and there were some sort of small cracks around doorways that if you put your hand up against it you could feel cold air coming through, but I haven't got that far yet.
Underneath the skirting boards? Yes.
No, but I have heard that's
In the house not very far from you, that was a big problem.
Interesting,
Because there would be no screen put over the block and beam floor. So air was getting up underneath the floor and then getting inside of the dab and dot plasterboard. And air whistles around under the plasterboard skin and finds its way out.
Interesting.
But silicone works marvellous.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things you could do to a house to improve it. Too many to mention almost in this talk. So, yeah. You're very welcome. I had no idea how long it would last. I kept brain dumping until last night, and then I thought I've got to stop. But thank you for listening, and please do take my details down. I'm more than happy to help if you've got any questions. I should say a thank you to people on the Facebook forums for both Octopus, and there's one for Dakin, the manufacturer of our heat pump. There are so many helpful people out there that have been in my position that know nothing or used to know nothing about heat pumps. They've taught themselves. They're more than happy to help you. So even this, if I can very briefly show you, and I've got no internet connection. This home assistant setup that I've got, someone built it for me. There was a forum, and this guy just said, "Oh, I'll set it up for you." And he's really knowledgeable. He spent hours getting it all set up and running. It's brilliant. So there are people out there that are more than willing to help, and I'd like to think I'm one of them. If any of you need help.
Sorry, a very technical question at the last.
Yeah.
Do you know what the refrigerant is that you use?
No.
No, it's the refrigerants themselves are very high level warming potential.
They are.
The standard one.
Yes.
Even R32 is still 600 times more polluting than CO2.
You definitely don't want it leaking.
No, but I think Dakin are using gradually recycling some of the old refrigerants. But that's if you're there's your zero bills and then perhaps being zero carbon.
Oh yes, zero. Yeah, and also what do they call it? Ingrained carbon, or so if you, like the materials you build a house from, they emitted carbon in their production cycle. So yeah, there's whole nother rabbit hole. Yeah.
Do
Do you think there are ages of property? I mean, I live in Fleet as well,
Hmm.
and sort of Fleet is like any town, it's grown, you've got periods of house building.
Hmm.
Do you think there are periods of house building where a lot of this doesn't really work? I mean, I live in a 30s house where the premise was that the walls were highly ventilated. So they're hollow walls and suspended floors. And, you know, neighbours who've had them cavity wall insulated have had complications because the timber work basically rots because the houses were never meant to go above 18 degrees with coal fires, right? So, you know, I suppose where I'm going with this is there a cut-off point in terms of house construction before which you kind of go, this approach doesn't really work. This is how you end up with damp homes and mould and things because you're hermetically sealing something that inherently was supposed to be air dried externally. Because that's the process I'm going through at the moment, where I'm reluctant to over-insulate my house because actually, you know, in my roof there's no roof felt. I can see the inside of the tiles.
Oh wow!
But the timber from 1927 looks like it was bought yesterday because the whole thing ventilates.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not pouring scorn on this approach. I'm just trying to sort of, in my mind, decide what do you do with an old house? Because maybe hermetically sealing it and insulating it, good for the bills, but not necessarily good for healthy living inside it.
So that's where the mechanical ventilation and recovery comes in, because it's a ventilation system, it's not a heating system.
Right.
It's a ventilation system that just captures the heat that you would otherwise be throwing out and recycling the heat. But that's the main function of it, is to clean the air up in the house and reduce.
I suppose with the roof and the rafters, you want to you stop the heat escaping at the ceiling level.
Yes.
So the roof can be completely uninsulated.
Yes, so you're absolutely right. You want to. It's still valid to have as much insulation in the roof, but the wall, because
the
way
walls are different.
The suspended floors work. You've got timbers going to an internal wall where they're kept dry because there's an air gap and air bricks, and air is circulating inside the walls all the time. But it means that the walls are bloody cold. You know, internally, if you put your hand on the walls, they feel cold.
Right.
And our house is a lot like your house used to be in your description of the heating characteristics, where, you know, you burn and it's warm, and then the moment heating goes off, you feel cold because your body senses the drop. I think humans, we're much better at sensing changes in temperature than we are consistent temperature. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off and on, but
it's interesting.
It's just how it relates to different eras of house construction.
I would probably, I'm not an expert, so what Ken has suggested with this, what's it called again? The thing in Swindon? No, the place in Swindon.
Oh, the NSBRC.
Yeah. I would advise.
But they have people talking about the building physics, and if you put insulation inside the walls, you can actually create a sort of a condensation point within the wall that actually reaches the dew point.
Yes.
And dumps water inside the wall.
You can also go and speak to an expert, so you're talking about your own individual house and circumstances.
Because that's the challenge, isn't it? Because if you go to somebody who installs insulation, the answer will be install insulation. You know, it's like getting financial advice from somebody who sells mortgages or pensions or whatever. So it's quite good. But thank you, that's very useful.
Any other questions, sir? And if you fail, just to say, if you fail to take his, you can always email us, and we can pass your email on to David, and then, you know, so don't worry if you haven't taken a photo, or you take a photo and then lose it or something. We can always put you in contact with David if that's helpful for anyone. But yeah, if there aren't any more questions, will
the slides be available somewhere?
Yes. So I've been making, if it worked, a screen recording of just the slides and my voice, and I'll put them together and put it on YouTube, and then I'll send you the link